it has three parts to it, and it helps kind of illustrate how this really is an up-down instead of a right-left issue. There's three parts to it. First, it's amnesty, doubling immigration in the future, and then promises of enforcement. The first two parts of those are for the various elite interests in this issue. The Democrat establishment wants amnesty. That's the whole reason they're interested in this bill. The point being, in the long run, obviously they want, turn these people into voters, turn their kids into voters, make sure they get their relatives come from abroad and they vote too. But the point is the Democrat elite, for them, the whole point of this bill is the amnesty part. The Republican establishment wants the doubling immigration part. This is doubling legal immigration. This is not what most people talk about when they were talking about this bill last year. Legal immigration now is more than 1 million a year, which is already ridiculously high, and if you all want to talk about that more later, I'm happy to do that. 1 million a year now. The legislation the Senate passed, and any kind of version of it that might get massaged or changed in the future would double that to 2 million new additional legal immigrants every year, and would double guest workers from about 750,000 to about 1.5 million every year. Supposedly temporary workers, although there's nothing as permanent as a temporary worker. And that's what the Republican part of the sort of elite coalition on this issue wants, mainly because giant bags of money from chambers of commerce and the industry lobbies, to be frank about it. And then the third part is promises of enforcement in the future. And those, the elites, both right and left elites that push this, see this as kind of a bone they throw to the public. They know it's not going to happen. The other things in this, the elite goals, are met immediately. In this legislation, and any legislation like this that they would pass, everybody gets amnesty right away. And the increases in immigration happen immediately regardless of anything else. The enforcement stuff eventually might happen if they feel like it. Essentially, it's a replay of what happened in 1986, where the bill that was passed in 1986, President Reagan signed it, amnestied the people who were here in exchange for promises of enforcement in the future. It's the first time they had a deal. It's sort of, you look at it on paper, it was like, okay, maybe that makes sense. Of course, if they'd thought it through and said, wait a minute, Ted Kennedy is the one promising that he'll make sure the law is enforced in the future, they should have known, but we can't, hindsight is 20/20. Nobody is at fault, frankly, from our side. They took a chance, it didn't work out. A couple years later, they did the other part where they dramatically increased legal immigration too. And illegal immigration just increased along with it. It wasn't any kind of substitution, as a lot of people say. Well, if you let people in legally, then they won't come in illegally. No, you let more people in legally, you get even more people illegally coming in. So the point is, we tried this deal before. Didn't work. And as the old saying goes, fool me once, shame on you, but fool me twice, shame on me. And that's the reason there's such resistance to this. Now, as far as what's specifically going on in Congress now, the core problem, the core political dynamic, is that Republicans, members in the House, don't trust their own leadership. This obviously is of direct relevance to people who live in the Richmond area, as well as people who live in Dayton, Ohio, where Speaker Boehner is, and wherever it is in California Kevin McCarthy is from. Nobody in the sort of rank and file members in the Republican caucus trust those guys. And that's the key problem with compromise, because politics is compromise. You're never going to get everything you want. The question is, are your leaders on your side or aren't they? Because if your leaders are on the other side, then you're the one who's compromising. If your leaders are on your side, then they do what they got to do and you get some of what you want, but you know that they are working for you, not working for the other side. The problem here is that John Boehner and Eric Cantor and Kevin McCarthy for all of their protestations, pretty much look like they are working hand in glove with Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi, rather than representing the interests of Republican members and Republican voters. And that's the problem. It's not that compromise is a dirty word, because that's just the way it is in the real world. It's that who is it, when they're in the meeting with Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi, whose interests are they promoting? That's the key issue. And look, I just saw something, this just came over on the news, a report of John Boehner speaking at a Rotary Club in his district back in Ohio, basically making fun of people who are concerned about the immigration issue and don't basically trust this is going to work. He said, and look, I'm just quoting this, he said to this group, he said, here's the attitude. Oh, and this is the way they're writing it here. Oh, like sarcastically. Oh, don't make me do this. Oh, this is too hard. This is what he's saying at a Rotary Club meeting. We get elected to make choices. We get elected to solve problems, and it's remarkable to me how many of my colleagues just don't want to. I've had every brick and bat and arrow shot at me over this issue just because I wanted to deal with it. I didn't say it was going to be easy. The problem here is not that that Congress shouldn't be trying to at least look at the immigration issue. The problem is we don't actually have anybody in leadership who's at the table negotiating for us. And let me give you an example. There's a thing that's going on now in Congress related to immigration that really helps illustrate this. There's something called the National Defense Authorization Act. Every year, they have to pass a bill to authorize the military spending, and then they pass a separate bill, it's the appropriations bill, where they actually appropriate the money. So the first step is the authorization bill. The leadership has basically colluded with several members, several Republican members, to insert an amnesty a small amnesty, into the defense appropriation bill. This would be an amnesty for illegal immigrants who came here before they were turned 16 to join the military and get amnesty that way. They get immediate citizenship, actually, because you're going to apply for citizenship as soon as you enlist if you're a non-citizen. So within a couple months, they wouldn't even just be legal immigrants. They'd go straight from being an illegal alien. Before their next birthday, they'd be U.S. citizens. The number of people this would cover is minuscule. It's not that big a deal, a couple hundred people a year maybe, because it's harder to get in the military than most colleges. I mean, there's all kinds of you can't, even a GED isn't good enough. You have to have a high school diploma. There's English requirements. If you got too many tattoos, they won't take you. If you smoke too much dope, they won't take you. I mean, there's all kinds of rules. So the number of illegal immigrant young people who would qualify is pretty small. And the Secretary of Defense already has authority, if he wants to admit to enlist anybody he wants. There's provision in the law that Secretary of Defense can waive the requirement that you have to be a lawful resident if it's in the national interest or something. I forget what the wording is. Chuck Hagel could just write a note, say, you know, this guy, Joe Blow, is a great guy, lived here since he was 3 months old, you know, he's in his junior ROTC at his high school, and he wants to devote his life to the Marine Corps and killing America's enemies. So I, Chuck Hagel, give him a waiver and he gets to join. They can already do that. So this provision that the leadership is trying to push into the defense bill has only one purpose. And that purpose is to serve as a Trojan horse when they send it to the Senate. Because the Senate bill, the one I talked about before, the Schumer-Rubio bill that they passed, they haven't sent that to the House. They can't send it to the House. Harry Reid, it has to hold on to it, because if he sends it to the House, it has provisions in it that raise funds. And the Constitution says the Senate cannot originate legislation that raises money. So if Harry Reid sends this bill that with all this hoopla was passed to the House, it would be what they call blue slip. In other words, they pass a resolution that says, regardless of what the substance of this is, it's just the bill isn't, this whole thing is null and void because it's unconstitutional. Period. And he'd have to start all over again. So he hasn't even sent the bill to the House. The point of this Trojan horse provision that I'm talking about, I'm spending all this time on it because the principle of the thing is what matters here, is that the Republican leadership wants to send it over to the Senate, so Harry Reid, and I assume their staffs have already talked about this, can stick in some or all of that Schumer bill that was passed by the Senate. Then it comes back to the House, and it's the defense authorization bill. You can't vote against that, can you? They have to pass it. What, do you want to shut down the Pentagon? What, are you, a communist? They have to pass it. This is a trick, and it's a trick that leadership, that John Boehner and Eric Cantor are part of. They've engineered this. I don't think it's going to work, but the point is it's not going to work only because we've managed to sort of raise a fuss about it. The point, again, I'm trying to make here is that Republican leadership in the House is not working on behalf of Republican members or Republican voters. That's the key issue. It's not, are we going to talk about immigration or are we going to do something on immigration? That's not the problem. The rationale that John Boehner and others have given is that, well, we can't do anything because we don't trust Barack Obama. Well, that's true. Nobody does. I don't either. Even House Democrats, some of them are starting to say, they're kind of getting uncomfortable with the way the guy is ruling by decree, sort of a decaffeinated Hugo Chavez. The problem is that Boehner then, and this is something else Boehner talked about, the Wall Street Journal reported on this last week. This was one of those sort of 47% gaffes, where somebody who wasn't supposed to have a camera phone was recording what he said. To donors, he said, I'm hell-bent on getting an immigration bill through this year. And then publicly he's saying, we don't trust Obama, and it's, he's lying to voters or he's lying to donors. Which group do you think he's lying to? It seems to me that, sort of looking forward, the imperfect but preferable goal is nothing happen this year, and if and when the Republicans take the Senate, again, it's not ideal because then it's Mitch McConnell and John Boehner negotiating, but better that than Harry Reid. That, I think, is going to, even within the Republican caucus, is going to be the message that why would we pass something this year, anything, if it's going to be sent over to Harry Reid? Let's at least wait till Mitch McConnell is there, who's at least a little bit better than Harry Reid, and then talk about it. So if I had to guess, nothing's going to reach the president's desk this year, but not because the Republican leadership doesn't want it to. They want it to. They'd be more than happy with the whole Schumer bill as is passing, if that's what it took. So, all the money is on the other side. All the lobbyists are on the other side, and the leadership of both parties is on the other side. It's only intense, deep public resistance to this, not just among Republicans, but Democrats and independents too. And the supporters of amnesty will often hold up polls and they say, look, the majority of the American people are for us. You can only imagine the way people, the way they come up with these poll questions. Often they'll ask, do you want to let hard-working, law-abiding illegal immigrants earn their status by memorizing the Pledge of Allegiance backwards and calling their mother every Sunday? Or do you want to round up people and tear them from their mother's bosoms and put them on cattle trains? Which do you choose? Well, it's a tough choice. When you ask, we've asked a couple of other questions, and we tried to do this neatly, neutrally. We didn't say illegal aliens, any of this stuff. We didn't use the word amnesty, even though that's the English word for this. But we said, okay, let's suppose there's a legalization program for the illegal immigrants who are here in exchange for enforcement in the future. How much confidence do you have that those enforcement objectives will actually be met, that the government will follow through on its enforcement promises? Nobody believes it. I mean, some people do, but some people voted for Obama too. But I mean, it's like 2 to 1, 2.5 to 1 we found of people just saying, they got no confidence this is going to happen. So theoretically speaking, and this includes me, some kind of amnesty at some point. You know, sometimes you got to deal with reality. We've had parking ticket amnesties. We have tax amnesties. You know, I don't like it. It's going to be expensive, but, you know, maybe. But you can't even talk about this issue until you fix the problem first that led to this problem to begin with. And that is the problem. That's the issue we have here. And the one thing when you hear people talk about this issue, politicians, first thing they'll say, Republicans will say the same thing. Everyone agrees our immigration system is broken, and so we just have to get beyond this and fix it. First of all, nothing is so broken that it can't be more broken, and that's what this legislation would do. Number two, our immigration system has lots of changes we need to make to it. I wrote a whole book on how to change it. There's all kinds of stuff. But the core problem is this administration, and frankly even the last one, although not quite as bad, isn't even using the tools it has to enforce the rules. For instance, yeah, exactly. In other words, the enforcement, it's the follow-through that's broken, not really the system that's broken. Let me just give you one example. People talk about the fence all the time. I've seen the fence. I've been on probably at this point a majority of the southern border. Fences are useful. It's a tool, but it's just a tool. There's a lot of enforcement that's not just fencing. People talk about fencing a lot just because it's kind of cool. It's easy to take pictures of. You love to go down there. You stand in front of the fence. You know, I have a picture actually for those of you on Twitter at Mark S. Krikorian. I put a picture of my header picture for my Twitter profile of the sun coming through, of a shadow of the fence with the sun behind me coming through, and I'm sort of my shadow taking a picture of the shadow of the fence. It's kind of a cool picture. So all of this is to say fences are good, fine, I'm all for them. Where we need them, let's use them. But almost half the illegal population didn't hop a fence or climb under a fence or sneak around a fence. They came in legally. They came in, our State Department gave them a tourist visa or a student visa or whatever it is, a border crossing card, which is a kind of visa Mexicans who live in border towns get. And then they just never left. And we still don't have a good way of making sure that you know who's left. Because if people don't check out when they leave, then you don't know who's still here. It's sort of obvious. And we're not even taking the most elementary steps, like send a postcard to visitors a week before their period of stay, their permission to be here expires, saying, greetings from Uncle Sam, you know, your time's up in a week, hope you had a great time, make sure you leave on time so there's no hassles for you. Half the people who would overstay would leave because they'd say, oh my gosh, they know where I am. We don't even do that. I mean, we're not even spending whatever, 32 cents or whatever it costs for a postcard. Even worse, Congress in 1996 required the implementation of an electronic tracking checkout system. Check-in, check-out for foreign visitors. Before that, it was done by paper. And I mean, you scrawled it on a piece of paper and the stewardesses collected. They sent it to Kentucky where a minimum wage employee of a contractor hunt and pecked with 2 fingers the information into some Radio Shack computer they had. That's the way it was done in the old days. Complete waste of time. It's better than it was. It's a little better. But in 1996, Congress required the implementation of electronic entry-exit system. Since then, that was time number 1. Since then, 7 more times Congress has mandated, required the executive branch to get on the stick and finish this. It's still not done. So this is what now? 18, is that 18 years? It's absurd. 18 years from now, if they require some some enforcement element in legislation and say, look, we're going to give everybody amnesty now, but we promise that we're going to get this enforcement goal done. 18 years from now, will it be done? I don't trust them as far as I can throw them, which is why the enforcement stuff has to be in place, working, overcome the ACLU, Chamber of Commerce, AFL-CIO lawsuits that will be launched against any of these significant enforcement measures, because they'll do that. They've already done it before in other instances together. ACLU, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and AFL-CIO are peas in a pod on immigration. They take long, hot showers together and plan what they're going to do. They are not on opposite sides of this issue. Once that stuff is actually running, then we can and I think should be talking about who do we amnesty and who don't we. But it's not a subject for discussion until that stuff is happening. And our leadership in Congress is not reading from that same page. They want to get this stuff done because they want to give the Chamber and the American Farm Bureau and the National Restaurant Association and the rest of them their money's worth. And, you know, to heck with the rest of it. So that's my rant, and I'm happy to take questions. Yes, ma'am.
Do you think the leniency in not doing anything with the border issue has anything to do with the North American Union that they want to implement?
Yeah, not directly. I mean, so the answer is, in a specific sense, no. There's nobody in the State Department and the White House. I mean, okay, how are we going to make the North American Union happen? It's more like the analogy. I remember when I read National Review as a high school student, I remember really struck me an analogy was that there, you know, since Comintern was abolished in Moscow, there's no communist conspiracy. They're just like bees, all of which have the same instinct. Nobody's telling the bees this is how you build the honeycomb. They just all have it in here because that's the way they think. That's the issue here, is that much of the elite, again, Republican and Democrat, doesn't even get why people are worried about borders or sovereignty. They just don't understand it. Therefore, anybody who's concerned about it must be a bitter, clinging yokel. And so, so my point here is, no, it's not part of a plan. It's just that they basically look at this issue from a similar perspective, the end point of which would be essentially abolishing you know, meaningful distinctions between the various countries, not just in North America, but everywhere else. I mean, that's really kind of the point of view. Yes, ma'am?
I don't know how many people are aware of Numbers USA.
Sure. Yeah, I can fly. I advertise them a lot. So
They're very big on the immigration issue.
Right.
And just today, as a matter of fact, sent out a notice talking about what you just said.
Right.
And you can fax your representatives, send faxes.
It's called numbersusa.com. My group is a think tank. It's a Center for Immigration Studies. So we do research, publications, you know, public education, panel discussions, that sort of thing. We blather to reporters. I mean, our job basically is halfway down a news story when they need somebody. The reporter wants somebody to give the other side from the reporter's neutral point of view. They call us up and we give them a quote. Numbers USA is an advocacy group. They have something like 2 million active members, and there's no cost to it or anything. You just register and you can fax for free from the website. The reason that's important is you never send a paper letter to your congressman's office in Washington. It will take 3 or 4 months to get there because they have to go to Kentucky where they're scanned for anthrax and stuff before they ever get them. Never buy, unless you're a, you know, an 8-year-old doing a project for school, never send a paper letter to Congress. And emails usually are tossed. It depends on the office. They don't pay attention to it. Some do, some don't. Faxing is the way to go. Numbers has all of the fax numbers, which aren't easy to get. And also give you up to the minute, this committee is talking about this thing the day after tomorrow, and here's the 4 people on it in your state. I mean, it's very valuable. So, you know, go visit our site first. There's a donate button. But Numbers USA, you definitely want to get involved if you want to do citizen activism. Yes, sir, in the back.
You mentioned a couple of congressional leaders and what your perception is of their roles in this negotiations and so forth. Can you speak more directly to our local 7th District elected congressman and what you perceive his role is in this and his thoughts?
And his interests.
Yeah, his interest is being Speaker of the House. I mean, that's kind of what it amounts to, I think. And, you know, as this is as Tom Davis, remember, was a congressman from up in my neck of the woods a number of years back. And in an earlier iteration of this issue, he actually said, in print, I don't know what he was thinking, he said, look, this immigration issue, it's important to the money people. That's why we pay attention to it, or something like that. So the point here is, whether it's Congressman Cantor or Boehner or any of the others, it's important to the money people. That's, first of all, that's the number one thing. And the number two thing, and for some of these guys, this is genuine. For some of them, it's just smoke screen. But some of them, I believe, I mean, I'll take people at their word, is they really don't know any other way of appealing to Hispanic voters. And their consultants have told them, look, you're going to get wiped out by this tsunami of the Hispanic vote unless you adopt Barack Obama's immigration policy tomorrow. And a lot of these guys utterly lack imagination, and they're being told this by people who are supposedly skilled in politics, who unfortunately don't know much about this issue. And they're saying, okay, we have to get right with Hispanics, and so we're going to pass. So it's both. It's giant bags of money plus quivering political fear about what's going to happen 10 or 12 years from now, or even during the 2016 election. And actually, on that point, let me just make one point quick, is that I've actually written about this before. Republican Party specifically, and conservatives more generally, I think do need to do a better job at outreach for immigrant communities. Now, there's a limit to how much good that's going to do, because immigrants now and always have been overwhelmingly Democrat at first, and then over time they get less Democrat. But one thing I think we should be doing is, instead of giving Karl Rove $400 million to flush down the toilet as he did in 2012, instead spend a tenth of that and set up American Opportunity Centers in immigrant neighborhoods, where Republican grassroots volunteers like you guys, like me, I knocked on doors for Reagan for my sins. Romney, excuse me, Reagan I did, that was good. Romney was, where people can teach citizenship classes to immigrants. Help them fill out tax returns at tax time. Maybe if somebody knows about the red tape of how to start a business, you have a little workshop. You want to start a little restaurant or a food truck or something, come to this free workshop on the first day. And it wouldn't be a heavy soft sell thing. Maybe you have an elephant in the logo or something like that. But the point is, you engage immigrant communities on a kind of consistent, ongoing basis, instead of every 2 years paying political consultants to run a bunch of ads on the radio as though that's going to solve anything. Anyway, that's my sort of pet peeve. The gentleman in the back had his hand up. And then
Just as a follow-up, that what you're saying is, our Representative Eric Cantor, it's far more important for him to serve himself and to serve the Republican Party than to serve the Southern District, because that's what's happening. By doing the vote sequences he's done in the last 2 years on amnesty, and now we see more and more the ads coming out of he's totally against amnesty,
Yeah.
if you follow his notes. So what you're saying, then some people, including Mr. Cantor, are sitting up there, it's more important for their reelection, and they're serving the Republican Party and the Chamber of Commerce than it is the people in the district.
Or the country's interests, even more broadly.
We elect them to serve us.
Yeah, and there was actually kind of an incident. I don't know how many. I guess you would have followed it more, but it made national news, where the president called Eric Cantor to talk about immigration or something, and Cantor, told the media, the president called me and I told him no, hell no, all this kind of histrionic stuff. Obama's story was much more believable, where he was like, suggesting it to him and wished him it. Well, yeah, exactly. It's the one time Obama seems to have told the truth, I think, anyway. But the point is, it's this double game. It's the same thing Boehner is doing, where he's telling the donors, I'm hell-bent on doing this, and then when the mics and the TV lights go on, oh, absolutely, we don't trust Obama. I mean, it's fake.
Yes.
Yeah, anyway, yes, sir, you.
Quick question. It's a question of how do you have data that says that illegal aliens that get amnesty will be voting Democrat? Because some of them are actually quite conservatives. I had a bunch of Moldovans who were Baptist, conservatives who are all illegal on a construction job of mine. And so I'm saying, do you have?
Yeah,
data
all
that
the
says-
Protestants from the Soviet Union are probably conservatives, but other than those 7 people, I'm not making a joke. I mean,
No,
really,
I-
Eagle Forum, Phyllis Schlafly's group, did a big report on this. If you go to the eagleforum.org, it's right there. A very extensively documented report on the political preferences of immigrants and immigrant communities, which are mainly at this point immigrants and their children. And there's no doubt about it. There's a significant minority of Hispanic and Asian immigrants or their children who are in fact conservative or at least open to conservative ideas. But it's a distinct minority. Among the Pew Hispanic Center did one thing. Let me just give you one statistic in this regard. Pew Hispanic, so Pew, this is a kind of liberalish but pretty mainstream group. They don't have political axes to grind. They did a study. They said to all different, a very large sample of people. Here's the word capitalism. Do you think of this in a positive or a negative sense? Here's the word socialism. Do you think of that as your reaction positive or negative? It turns out that Hispanics had the most negative response to the word capitalism of any group in the United States. Even people who volunteered that they were supporters of Occupy Wall Street liked capitalism more than Hispanics did. Now this isn't a moral failing necessarily. The point is, this is just the reality. And people who are Americans, our fellow citizens, whatever their background is, we need to try to persuade. The question is, what the heck are we doing with an immigration policy that's letting in another 1 million people every year who are inevitably going to be lopsidedly in favor of bigger government, more activist government, higher taxes, more gun controls, more environmental restrictions. All of those things have been extensively polled. Even on social issues, this is what everybody says, well, on life issues and stuff, then they're good. They're not really that socially conservative. They're kind of about where the rest of the electorate is, maybe a few ticks more pro-life than the average voter, but not that much. And they're much, much less likely to vote based on those social issues than on economic issues. And when you've got, for instance, almost 60% of families headed by a Mexican immigrant using at least one major welfare program, who are they going to vote for? I mean, it'd be irrational to vote for the party that says, welfare is really a problem and we want to have less of it. Yeah, I wouldn't. I mean, if I were on welfare, I'm not sure I'd vote for the party that said that. So the point is, it's not a moral failing. It's a question of what do we want future immigration policy to be. The left explicitly, openly, without any secrets, says immigration policy is a tool to solidify a progressive majority for the future. They've just said this openly. It's on the record. This isn't secret microphones or anything. Conservatives have to play that game, otherwise they're going to lose. Yes, sir. You have the
Yes.
And then
Obama's former chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel, when asked why do you support Obama, why do you support the immigration bill, he said because it helps Democrats.
Yeah.
Polls have shown, there's been a poll, I don't think you know about it, of illegals found that 80% of them would vote Democrat.
Sure.
This will lead to, and what they want is a permanent Democrat majority controlling Washington.
Yeah. Now
British Foundation has pointed out is fairly well demonstrated that the net economic effect and the net tax effect of the illegals and of the bill, the Senate bill, is a net drain on the U.S. and the state treasuries. It's going to cost us more money as taxpayers to have these people here and allow them to take all the welfare that they can get. Yet we're being told by the chamber and others that this is going to be a great economic boom.
it's going to be a boon. It's going to reduce the deficit,
Yeah.
just like Obamacare. Remember, was supposed to reduce the deficit. There's only so many times these guys can come up with these stories, and we believe them. Just
there any rebuttal?
one point on the voters thing. This clearly is part of the goal, is importing voters and all that. There's no question about that. But that's a long-term thing, because if you get legalized, some share, I mean, it's only about half of the illegals from the last amnesty ever became citizens. And then, you know, immigrants are much less likely, Hispanic immigrants in particular, to actually register to vote if they're citizens, and then if they're registered, to actually show up. So the voter effect is real, but it's a kind of long-term thing. The short-term political effect is to exacerbate poverty, increase the number of uninsured people, increase the gap between rich and poor, because then the progressive left gets to tell ordinary voters, they're not even talking about immigration, they're saying, look at how bad uninsured, how many uninsured people there are. We really need to fix this. We need to have socialized medicine. They don't tell you that 2/3 of the growth over the past 10 years, 2/3 of the growth in the uninsured population is driven by immigration. They don't tell you that 1/3 of all children in poverty are immigrant families. Now again, they're not bad because of this, but what it is a tool, a strategy of the big government left to exacerbate social problems so that their solutions are even more relevant to sort of average middle of the road people who are just saying, wow, you know, that's a lot of child poverty, maybe we should do something about that.
But
That's the immediate effect.
Voter registration, in the old days, you're right, that today, their effort is to have, when you get a driver's license.
Right,
when you're
sure,
signing up to
yeah.
voter, when you go to welfare, get your welfare, you're signing up for voting.
Right.
All
I mean,
this-
the voter fraud problem is real, but there's not that many illegal aliens voting. It happens. I'm not going to say. The real problem, the bigger problem, and it's not huge even there, but it's legal immigrants voting, especially among Latin American immigrants. Mexicans in particular, almost every one of them was illegal when they got here. In other words, very few Mexican immigrants, some, but very few have not been illegal. So especially for sort of less educated guys, they come here illegally, and then if they get legalized, they think they became a citizen. Because there's 2 steps. You come here and you have to wait and do something, and then you become a citizen. Except that they came here illegally, waited a while, did something, and got a green card. In other words, lawful status but not citizenship. When non-citizens vote, they often think they're citizens. They don't even realize that they're doing anything wrong, and Acorn isn't going to point it out to them. So it's a problem. But you know, if you tighten up the rest of immigration, it becomes a much less of a problem. Ma'am?
Out of the Chinese, the Muslim, and the Hispanics, which ones come over the borders more? Do you
Well,
have the
obviously,
numbers?
well, I mean, 2/3, well, no more than that, 75 to 80% of the illegal population is Latin American, is Mexican or Central American. So about 80%. And then the other 20 or 25% is a little bit of everything. Probably mostly Asian, but there's Middle Easterners, Europeans, Africans, whatever. I mean, but this is mainly a Latin American issue. Now, that's the total illegal population. About 60% of the total illegals jumped over the fence. And the overwhelming majority of them, even more than 80%, probably 90% or 95% are Hispanic. The problem is, how many Pakistani illegal aliens do you need sneaking into Texas to blow something up? You know, not that many. So the issue is, from a security perspective, the numbers issue from, say, the Middle East or elsewhere isn't really the thing. It's not that, you know, 15% of illegals sneaking across the border are Muslim. It's that there are significant numbers, most of whom are just regular schmoes going to dishwashing jobs like any other illegal alien, but some of them aren't. I mean, we already have one guy in jail, an illegal alien, who was a Hezbollah fundraiser, and they finally caught up with him in Michigan. He's in federal prison now, but he snuck through. I don't think he snuck over the border. He was like hidden in the trunk of a car or something and was snuck through that way. So it happens. Somebody in
Thanks, next back.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. Who are you picking up? Yes.
Yes. I'm going to raise an issue that sometimes, I don't know, gets raised in these. And first of all, I realize this is an informational session. Very much appreciate your eloquent presentation. But I think and I agree with many things that you say. It sounds like this is a bad bill. We do need enforcement of the laws first. But I think one of the issues is that we shouldn't have illegal immigration, and we definitely need to have the federal government in the service of national security and national defense. That's the primary business of the federal government, in my view. And I think in many of your views, I was But I think we really have to question this notion that we want to use big government to manage population. And I would say perhaps the problem with illegal immigration is that we don't have enough legal immigration in the following sense. The Tea Party principles, if I'm correct, include, very importantly, limited government. It also includes the notion of free markets, open markets. So why would we, on one hand, be in favor of limited government, and why would we be in favor of open markets, and then, oh, well, over here, we're going to restrict and manage the population? And I very much am sympathetic and do realize it's a concern that the recent immigrants have been voting Democrat, and I've looked on your website and some of the referred articles therein, and that is an issue, and we should be concerned with that. And we should be concerned with, what kind of immigration policy we really should have. And I think part of the thorny issue is how do we get from where we are to a sane immigration policy. But I would forward, at least for discussion and consideration, that if we're really in favor of the principles of limited government, if we're really in favor of the principles of free and open markets, why would we want to manage the population? Why would we want to restrict the movement of capital or labor? And why would we want to restrict and limit the movement of population? So I think that's something we should be concerned with respect to our principles. Now, some of them may
Can I put that into a nutshell?
Yeah, a little bit.
Because
Well, I mean, I have
here's my point, Mark.
No,
And-
but I just want to say that.
Well, we have a guest speaker, I just don't want to keep going, that's all. But can you ask a question or put it in a nutshell? 'Cause
Well,
think
I know the question.
Well,
I mean, I get
well,
it.
I just did. Why not, why do we support free markets?
Yeah.
Okay,
The-
managing the population
the,
is a means to
yeah.
to achieve an election result is using people as a means to an end. Isn't that what we're against? Aren't we standing for principle? Call us naive, but I thought that's what the Tea Party is about.
And Mark, let me break in too. We have several libertarian people in the Tea Party, and we
Right.
agree on so many things. Usually we get off the bus at some of the social end issues, but Tea Party people aren't supposed to get into that anyway.
Right.
So,
I won't talk about smoking dope.
So I've actually heard what Craig just articulated very well. I've heard that several times,
Sure, yeah.
and I deal with libertarian people almost daily, so
Right.
this is a concern.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of things. First of all, I'm managing the population. I find an abhorrent idea. I mean, there's no question about it. The problem is that our immigration policy is, in fact, a kind of social engineering. This is why my perspective on immigration is that is that there shouldn't be any immigration for its own sake, just immigration for the sake of immigration. That what we need to do is not zero immigration, but zero-based budgeting. You start at zero, because a modern country with 315 million people that stretches from sea to sea does not need more people. There are more people, fine. I have 3 kids, have all you want. That's none of anybody's business. But it doesn't need to import more people from outside. But there are going to be some groups of people, some categories of people whose admission is so compelling that we should do it anyway. That would be husbands, wives, and little kids of American citizens. You marry somebody during your junior year abroad in Italy or whatever it is, you have every right to expect that your fellow citizens will delegate to you the right to decide that person should come into the country. But that's a lot of people. That's 350, 400,000 people a year, right there now. And that's never been shut off or limited. My grandmother on my mother's side came in after the 1920s immigration shut off because she married my grandfather. They went to Cuba, got married, registered, and then came to the United States. Secondly, and this is kind of my, building up from the bottom immigration policy, husbands, wives, and little kids of American citizens, a handful of real Einsteins, genuinely the best and brightest in the world, as opposed to kind of a lot of average talents that we get now. They're not bad guys, they'll have a job, but there's nothing special about a lot of them. And then some modest number of real refugees who really have nowhere else to go and never will. There's not that many refugees like that in the world, and very few of the people we take in as, quote, refugees fit that description. You add that together, you end up with about 500,000 people. But it's not, okay, let's let in 500,000 people tomorrow. That's social engineering. This is the opposite of social engineering. This is, let's not use immigration policy for, central planning purposes. Let's decide from the bottom up which categories of people we think it's really important to let in and just let all of them in every year. The problem is that all forms of immigration legislation that are out there are social engineering. And especially the business side pushing immigration, they are specifically saying, you guys aren't having enough kids. The kids you do have are all lazy slackers. So F you, we're going to import people who are better than you. That is, in a nutshell, the whole point of the immigration lobbying, especially from the corporate right. In fact, sometimes they even say it in that directive form. Usually it's a little more dressed up, but not much. As far as limited government, absolutely. I mean, I'm a conservative. I'm a libertarian-ish conservative. But you have to have limited government in one country. Maximum freedom within the country, maximum control in who we let into the country. Because the only alternative, you either have controls or you don't. If you don't have, if any kind of controls on immigration, and I'm not saying terrorism or people with diseases, I'll stipulate that, but any limits on the number of people who can come here is by definition some form of control. So either you have some kind of control and limits which requires enforcement to make sure they're complied with, or you have no limits. I debated Tuesday a guy at the Reason Foundation, which is one of the libertarian outfits. Reason.org is their website. They have a magazine. Their Washington office, I debated an economist from George Mason University. My son is there, but thank God he's not taking any economics courses. Brian Kaplan is his name. He's an affable enough guy. But his thing is that any form of immigration control is a violation of the principles of limited government, that it is morally wrong to treat any foreigner in any way different from any American citizen. And I congratulate him because he at least is being honest about what that is. If you're going to have any limits, you're going to need to have government, some levels of government controls on that. I'm all for getting rid of the Small Business Administration and HUD and HHS and I don't know, I mean, we could go on, everybody will come up with their favorite department to get rid of. We need to have controls on who is let into the club, basically. Because if we don't have controls on access, then you cannot maintain limited government within the club, if you will. I mean, you've got to choose, because you can't just say, that's right, yeah, immigrants are voting big government, that's important, and let's deal with it. Sorry. 100 years from now, we might be able to persuade the descendants of today's immigrants to vote more conservative. That's essentially what happened with Reagan Democrats, and earlier than that, Nixon's silent majority. Those people were the grandchildren of Ellis Island immigration, but it took a lifetime to change enough of those people's political preferences to make a difference. We can't afford that.
Well, doesn't that also go along with making sure you have enough resources to take care of the people that's here?
Sure. I mean, because look, libertarians will often tell me, and even conservatives will say this too, there's really nothing wrong with immigration that getting rid of the welfare state won't fix. My answer is, okay, get rid of the welfare state and then give me a call when you do that and we'll talk about immigration. Alternatively, I get people saying, you're right about all that multiculturalism and grievance politics and all of this kind of stuff, so let's just get rid of multiculturalism and not immigration. Call me when you get rid of multiculturalism. Welfare and multiculturalism are deeply rooted phenomena in our society. Look, multiculturalism is a good example. And this is not, I'm not giving you a government example, because it's not just, well, let's get the government to make English the official language and that'll fix it. No. When I was a reporter up at the Winchester Star years ago up in the valley. and it was J.C. Penney's 90th anniversary, and I was the business writer. So did a little story because we had a J.C. Penney store in our mall, and had a picture of Mr. Penny himself, James Cash Penney, with his regional salesman from 1903 or something, and they all have their tall collars, and they're all like this in the picture on a podium posed on a stage, completely bedecked with patriotic bunting and flags. Fast forward 100 years. Ralph Nader sent a letter to each one of the Fortune 500 corporations a number of years back, maybe 10 years back. I think he owns like one share in each one, so he gets to be a shareholder. Wrote him a letter and said, since your corporation is an American legal person, you exist as an extrusion of American law, as a shareholder, I insist that we open the next shareholder meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. Every company that responded except one, and I think it was Pfizer, but don't hold me to that. Every other company that responded to his letter said, that's an outrageous, jingoistic, McCarthyite, and racist suggestion that we should open our board meetings with the Pledge of Allegiance, or our shareholders meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. Government didn't make them do it. This hostility to assimilation, or at best ambivalence about American patriotism, is rooted in every corporate HR department, every school, every daycare center, every church. It's not something, just like welfare is not something you can kind of wish away and it's no problem. And so until we fix that kind of stuff, taking in 1 million+ people a year and having the National Education Association assimilate them into their version of America is probably not the smartest move.
Last
sir.
question, I'm afraid, we're going to run out of time. So
Okay, well just pull,
Yeah.
give me the hook whenever you're
Oh,
done.
no, I don't want to do that, but,
Go ahead,
they're
yes.
going to turn the lights
I
up.
understand all the counter arguments, but what if the idea was, okay, you open up immigration, but you have to be born here to vote?
Yeah, then you end up with Saudi Arabia, or some of those other Gulf states where the majority of people aren't citizens. Actually, we had our own experience with that. It's called South Carolina in 1850, and it didn't work real well. I want my kids to grow up in a republic of citizens, where some number of foreigners come in, and after jumping through some relatively modest hoops, are able to become members of our club. But that way leads to a two-tier kind of society, a sort of master-slave society that is fundamentally inimical to the American experience. And the one last point is, I'm happy to hear the response, but the last point is, it is completely unsustainable because they will all get the vote eventually anyway. There's no way to keep that. We can't even keep non-citizens from accessing welfare. Congress in 1996 passed restrictions on it. Then as soon as the ink was dry, they started making carve-outs. The states picked up the slack. All kinds of things happened. And, they're collecting welfare at the same rates they were before the reform.
My reply would be, to say that that would be like having a master and slave population, I think that's preposterous. It's just as easy to get guided as it can be.
Why would you go back to Congo once you've been here? The fact is,
That's a
being
choice they have.
being
They can come here and
unemployed,
not be able to vote, or they can stay where they are.
being unemployed and homeless in America beats the heck out of running Congo, quite frankly. So that, but my point is, in the real world, that doesn't happen. It just doesn't. Even immigrants who come here expecting to go back. I remember I took a cab once to the airport. There's a Ghanaian cabbie from Ghana in Africa. He's a talkative guy, so we're talking. He said, yeah, I came here, I expected I was going to work here for a few years, save up some money, go back and be able to buy a car back in Ghana and have my own little cab business back there. But, then we had kids, and the kids said, what do you mean, Ghana? We're not going anywhere. That's crazy. And they end up staying. In other words, even immigrants who think they're going to go back, some of them do. There's no question. Some immigrants do go back. It happens. It happened before. It happens now. The fact is, especially given the enormous differences between the third world and the United States. This sort of physical, and I mean, until you've lived in the third world, you don't really get it. I mean, I've lived in a sort of a high-functioning part of the third world for a couple of years. I was a student in Soviet Armenia in the mid-'80s. And it was the third world, but it was a, you know, kind of functional, you could drink the water sort of third world. And, you know, I mean, a 3-lane highway had 5 cars side by side driving up it. You know, the buses are spitting out filth into your face like you wouldn't believe out of the exhaust pipes. Every person has to have a 5-ruble bill in his driver's license, so when the cop stops you, you can just automatically, it makes the payoff just much more efficient and quick. You know, that kind of thing, that's a high-functioning part of the third world. So no, people aren't going to go back. They're just not. People don't emigrate from countries where you can, where, you know, it's okay to be in.
If they don't want to go back, then they should complain about it.
Yeah, but you think the ACLU will say, oh, okay, no problem, we won't complain. You think La Raza is going to say, you know, you're right, you deserve not to have the vote. No, sorry, it doesn't. I wish it could work that way.
Sorry. Yeah, I know Ben, and he's my boss.
I can be accosted some afterwards, I don't need to run back. Everybody's going to be asleep by the time I get home anyway.
I was going to say, I make that drive too. By the way, how was the traffic? Pretty.
3.5 hours to
Yeah,
get
I
here.
thought so.
from San
All right, did you hear that? Okay.
Don't move to DC.